Police unjustly accuses black girl of theft, but when her father arrives, everything changes in an unexpected way. What happens when a child's innocence is put to the test in a world that often judges her by the color of her skin? The story of Maya Johnson begins on an ordinary day, where the routine of a 12-year-old black girl transforms into a nightmare. Maya, a curious and intelligent girl, has always dreamed of making a difference in her community, helping her mother at the local market and dedicating herself to her studies. However, as she enters a convenience store, everything changes when she is unjustly accused of theft by a police officer. What seemed like a simple purchase of a snack turns into a challenge that could mark her life forever. Maya's life unfolds in a welcoming neighborhood in Atlanta, where everyone knows and respects her family. She grew up among friends and neighbors who love her, but behind the friendly facade lies a cruel reality. The convenience store owned by Ms. Sharon Miller, although close to her home, has always represented a space of distrust. Maya knew that some glances followed her, but she never allowed that to shake her. When she entered the store in her school uniform, she just wanted a snack to satisfy her hunger. But when Officer Richard Barnes sees her, his prejudiced mind instantly transforms her into a criminal. The atmosphere inside the store quickly becomes tense and oppressive as Maya tries to explain her innocence. The officer, driven by his own biases, searches her without hesitation, ignoring her pleas. The silence of Sharon, the store owner, weighs heavily, reflecting the hesitation many feel when the situation seems hopeless. The arrival of David Johnson, Maya's father, completely changes the scene. He, a respected civil rights attorney, enters the store determined to protect his daughter and challenge the injustice she is facing. David, with his confident demeanor and legal knowledge, places himself between Maya and the officer, firmly questioning Richard's actions. David's words not only contest the accusation, but also spark a deep reflection on prejudice and justice. The emotional impact on Maya is immediate, and the interactions that follow reveal the layers of prejudice that permeate society. This is a moment that will not only shape Maya's future, but also challenge everyone present to confront their own beliefs and fears. The clash between the defense of justice and the reality of racial prejudice unfolds, revealing the strength of paternal love in the face of adversity. Maya, through her vulnerability and dreams, becomes a symbol of overcoming and resist. As the story progresses, the reader is invited to explore not only the impact of prejudice on a young girl, but also the strength of a community that can come together to challenge injustices. What happens when a father's protection clashes with the flaws of a system? The outcome of this story may reveal not only the truth about Maya, but also the true essence of humanity. Maya felt her heart race as she watched her father, David, confront Officer Richard Barnes. The tension in the convenience store was palpable, and her mother's gaze waiting outside lingered in her mind. She had always taught Maya to be strong, to stand firm in the face of adversity, but at that moment, doubt began to creep into her thoughts. What would happen if her father couldn't protect her? What if injustice became a permanent shadow in her life? The officer, with a look of disdain, insisted that Maya was a thief. His words were like knives, cutting through the girl's innocence and revealing a world she did not yet fully understand. Maya remembered all the times she had been the target of suspicious glances, but she never imagined that one day it would turn into a direct attack on her dignity. The serious and determined face of her father was the only comfort she had. As David faced Richard, a crowd began to gather outside. Neighbors and friends of Maya, drawn by the commotion, watched silently, some with worried expressions, others with indignation on their faces. Among them was Jamal, a childhood friend of Maya, who had always supported her in her ideas and dreams. He was only 13, but he already understood the injustice that permeated society. His presence brought some hope to Maya, but her own fears enveloped her like a dark cloud. However, the situation continued to deteriorate. The officer, determined to prove his point, could not see beyond his own distorted view of reality. He began to raise his voice, increasing the tension even more. Maya froze, struggling against the tears that threatened to escape. She wanted to scream, wanting everyone to know she was just a girl looking for a snack after a tiring day of classes, but the words felt trapped in her throat. David, on the other hand, was not willing to back down. He began to describe the situation with clarity and fervor, emphasizing that Maya was not a criminal, but a child full of dreams and hopes. The father knew that at that moment, every word counted. He looked at his daughter, and in his gaze was a silent promise that he would fight for her, not just there but everywhere injustice manifested itself. David was determined to use his voice and his position as an attorney not only to protect Maya, but also to challenge the system that allowed such injustices to occur. Time seemed to drag on. As David and Richard exchanged sharp words, Maya observed the faces around her. She saw Ms. Miller, the store owner, hesitating to intervene. She had always been kind, but now the doubt in her eyes showed that fear was paralyzing her. Listening to the echoes of the conversation, Maya felt a mix of anger and sadness. Why were people so afraid to confront what was right? Why did the truth seem so distant when injustice was so close? Amidst that turmoil, Jamal decided to take action. He approached the store, pulling other friends and neighbors with him. Together, they began to support Maya, shouting words of encouragement. "She hasn't done anything wrong. Leave her alone." The community's unity took David by surprise, but it brought a smile to Maya's face. She had never realized the strength that existed in her neighborhood until that moment. The solidarity forming around her felt like a powerful reminder that her struggle was not just personal, but collective. The presence of her friends gave Maya a new boost, but at the same time, she felt torn. The supportive voices were encouraging, but they also awakened a deep fear. What if this situation turned violent? What if they got hurt because of her? These thoughts haunted her, making her more aware of the weight she carried. Her fight was not only against prejudice, but also against the fear of hurting those she loved. As the tension mounted, Maya realized that this moment was not just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been judged by the color of their skin, about everyone facing injustice without the chance to defend themselves. Her heart pulsed with the determination to fight, not just for herself, but for all who felt powerless in the face of discrimination. What had once seemed like an individual struggle was now becoming a call to action, an opportunity to challenge the norms and perhaps create change. The clash between David and Richard continued, but Maya felt that the real battle was just beginning. She needed to find her voice. She needed to be part of this fight, and by doing so, she might discover the strength that had always existed within her, even when the world tried to say otherwise. Maya felt her heart race as the situation intensified. The atmosphere in the convenience store was charged with a mix of fear and hope. David, her father, faced Richard with a determination that Maya admired, but that also made her anxious. The tension in the words exchanged between them seemed to cut through the air, and the presence of her friends outside, shouting words of support, made her feel a little stronger but also more vulnerable. As Richard attempted to belittle David, claiming he was just defending a criminal, Maya felt suffocated by a whirlwind of emotions. She wanted to scream. She wanted the officer to see the truth in her eyes, to see her as the girl she was, full of dreams, full of life. But instead, she felt paralyzed, as if the words she longed to say were stuck in her throat, an invisible barrier between her and reality. The crowd forming outside increased the pressure on Maya's shoulders. Each shout of support from her friends felt like a wave pulling her up, but the uncertainty held her down. What if it all ended in violence? What if Richard, enraged by the resistance, decided to act drastically? These questions tormented her, and the feeling of helplessness enveloped her like a shadow. However, there was something inspiring about the unity of her friends and neighbors. Jamal, who always had a clear vision of the world around him, was at the forefront of the group, encouraging others to join the cause. His brave voice resonated among the shouts of support, and Maya felt grateful to have a friend like him by her side. But at the same time, the pressure of the situation made her question whether she could be the hero everyone expected. The conflict continued to escalate. Richard, feeling challenged, began to raise his voice even more, attracting the attention of other officers passing by. Their presence only heightened Maya's panic. She knew that any wrong move could turn the situation into something much more dangerous. The thought of her father being arrested or harmed made her want to run to him and hug him, but fear kept her paralyzed. David, sensing the change in atmosphere, tried to calm the situation. He gestured for Maya's friends to quiet down, but their support was unwavering. That crowd was a symbol of resistance, and for a moment, Maya felt a wave of hope. But that hope was soon overshadowed by a new reality. More officers began to approach, and what had once seemed like a simple discussion was about to escalate. As Maya absorbed all of this, a sense of weakness began to invade her. She felt trapped between the desire to fight and the fear of what might happen. If her father failed, if the situation turned violent, What would happen to her and her family? These questions tormented her, and the emotional pressure began to manifest physically. Her stomach churned and breathing became more difficult. She wanted to scream, but the words dissolved in her mind. Jamal, noticing Maya's state, approached her. He held her hand, conveying a calmness that she desperately needed. "Maya, no matter what happens, we are with you," he said, his voice firm and reassuring. That simple declaration made her feel less alone, but anxiety still consumed her. Her father's struggle was also hers, and the pressure of being everyone's hope weighed heavily on her shoulders. Meanwhile, David continued to try to keep the situation under control. He attempted to talk to Richard, but the officer's words grew increasingly aggressive. The verbal fight transformed into a true clash of egos, and Maya realized that the tension was about to explode. What had once seemed like a civilized discussion was now turning into a battle of forces, and she feared that the line between right and wrong was becoming increasingly blurred. The presence of the other officers was now an undeniable reality. Their stern gazes heightened the pressure on David, who seemed to be fighting against a system much larger than himself. Maya felt a wave of despair wash over her. What if, despite all the support, everything ended in disaster? What if, in the end, they couldn't change anything? The weight of disillusionment hit her hard, and the feeling that the struggle was futile began to spread through her mind. But amid the chaos, a small inner voice began to rise. Maya realized that although she felt fear, there was also a spark of courage within her. She remembered her mother's lessons about facing adversity, about the strength that resides in each of them, and as she looked at her father and the friends around her, she decided that she could not let doubt take over. It was time to find her own voice and join the fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who had faced similar situations. With that, Maya's determination began to grow. She knew that the battle was far from over, but no matter how difficult it was, she was ready to fight. The struggle wasn't just about her, it was about a future where justice prevailed. And alongside her friends and her father, she was willing to face any challenge that came her way. Maya watched the scene before her, her heart racing. The tension in the air was palpable, and every word exchanged between David and Richard seemed to be a step toward the abyss. When the crowd began to shout, a sound of support mixed with fear, a new officer approached. He was younger, perhaps a rookie, but his gaze was filled with determination. Maya felt a chill in her stomach. The young officer was exactly what her situation needed, but he could also be a catalyst for trouble. Richard, noticing the new presence, turned and began to gesture even more dramatically. He tried to turn the young officer into his ally, convincing him that David was the real threat. Maya could see the conflict on the rookie's face. He looked hesitant, as if he were trying to decide between following orders or listening to his own instincts. That indecision made her even more anxious. What would happen if he chose to support Richard? With an unexpected impulse, Maya felt that she needed to act. She grabbed Jamal's hand and, with a determined look, began to move toward the entrance of the convenience store. What she was about to do could change everything. "Wait, Maya." Jamal tried to hold her back, but she didn't stop. There was something inside her that cried out for justice, to be heard, and she couldn't ignore it. When she finally positioned herself next to her father, she felt his strength beside her, but also the fragility of the situation. "Richard," she said, her voice stronger than she had expected, "this is not how things should work." The look of surprise on Richard's face was unmistakable. Maya didn't know how, but the words flowed from her mouth. "My father is not here as a criminal. He is here for us, for our community." "You can't just ignore that." Silence fell and all eyes turned to her. Maya felt the weight of every gaze, every expectation. The young officer, who until then had seemed indecisive, was now paying attention, his eyes fixed on her. It was as if, at that moment, her presence changed the dynamic. The tension that had previously existed only between David and Richard was now spreading and becoming a collective struggle. But then, something unexpected happened. Richard, furious, took a step toward Emma. "You don't know what you're talking about, girl. You're getting into something you don't understand." He was so close that she could feel his breath. Fear hit her like a punch to the gut, but at the same time, the courage that had been born inside her began to mix with adrenaline. "I know you're wrong," Maya replied, her voice firmer than ever. "You can try to intimidate my father, but we will not be silenced. We won't let you do this." Looking at David, she saw the mix of pride and concern on his face. He wanted to protect her, but he also knew she needed to stand her ground. The young officer, realizing the gravity of the situation, stepped forward. "Richard, this isn't right," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. "We can't let this happen." His statement was a turning point. Maya felt a ray of hope pierce her fear. If he was on her and her father's side, maybe there was a chance. But the tension did not dissipate. Richard became even more aggressive, and the crowd's support seemed to turn into a deafening clamor. Panic began to spread, and the situation was on the verge of exploding. Maya realized that even with support, what they were facing was much bigger than she had imagined. The struggle was not just against Richard, but against a system that often silenced the voices of those crying out for justice. Feeling overwhelmed, Maya had a revelation. What she thought was a fight for justice was, in fact, a battleground where her own identity was at stake. She was not just fighting for her father's truth, she was fighting for her own voice, for her own dreams, for a future she envisioned. However, the fear of failure haunted her. What if she couldn't change the situation? What if in the end everything she was doing was in vain? The uncertainty hit her hard and she hesitated, but as she looked at the faces of her friends and her father, a new determination began to rise. She realized she was not alone. Every shout of support, every resolute gaze, every hand raised beside her was a reminder that the struggle was collective. Even though there were failures and fresh starts, each step in the right direction counted. With this new perspective, Maya took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever came next. It was time to stand up, not just for herself, but for everyone who, like her, fought for voice and truth. She was ready to confront the challenge, even if it meant facing her own weaknesses and finding the strength that had always been within her. Maya felt her heart race as the tension around her grew. Richard's gaze, filled with anger, made her feel small, but the determination that had blossomed inside her was stronger than the fear. She knew she had crossed a line, but there was no turning back. The decision to stand by her father, to defend her truth, would change everything in her life. The crowd, once confused and noisy, now seemed in tune with Maya's courage. The shouts of support intensified, and she could feel the warmth of solidarity surrounding her. However, the euphoria was quickly overshadowed by reality. Richard, furious, would not be easily intimidated. The struggle was far from over. The young police officer, who had seemed hesitant before, was now in a delicate position. He looked at Maya, and she could see the internal struggle on his face. He wanted to do the right thing, but the pressure from Richard was immense. "Maya, you need to step back," he said, almost pleading. "This could end very badly." His words hit her like an arrow, but she refused to yield. Seeing the situation unfold, David began to move, trying to get closer to Maya. He knew his daughter was in danger and needed to protect her, but the tension in the air made everything more complicated. "Maya, please step back," he pleaded, his voice trembling with concern. But Maya couldn't. She had taken a step forward and would not retreat. Richard, realizing he was losing control, decided to escalate his aggression. "You're getting involved in something you don't understand, girl. This isn't a place for children." The hostility in his words made Maya's stomach churn, but she stood firm, looking into Richard's eyes with an intensity that challenged his power. The crowd continued to shout, and the atmosphere was about to explode. The tension was palpable, and Maya realized that her actions would not only affect her, but also everyone around her. With this in mind, she took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions that engulfed her. The young police officer, recognizing the gravity of the situation, gestured toward Richard. "We need to end this. We can't let it turn into a violent confrontation," he said, his voice charged with urgency. The pressure was rising, and Maya felt that time was running out. If Richard wasn't contained, the consequences could be devastating. But even with the officer's help, the situation seemed untenable. Richard turned to the crowd, trying to incite even more anger. "Do you think this man is a hero? He's a criminal." The clamoring increased, and Maya realized there was a new obstacle in her way: Richard's emotional manipulation over the crowd. She knew she needed to act quickly. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "You're being deceived. What Richard says isn't true. He just wants to maintain control." The words spilled from her mouth like a cry of desperation, but also of hope. She wanted people to see the truth, to unite around what was right. Meanwhile, David felt a wave of pride and concern at the same time. He had always known his daughter had inner strength, but seeing her confront Richard like that left him torn. He wanted to protect her, but he knew her support was crucial. And what if something happened? A chill ran down his spine at the thought of losing Maya. The tension was at its peak, and the crowd seemed in a boiling state. The young police officer, realizing the situation was about to become uncontrollable, decided to take action. He stepped between Richard and Maya, trying to calm the spirits. "We all need to stay calm. We won't let this turn into something worse," he said, his voice steady. Maya looked at the officer, grateful for his support, but the battle was still not won. Richard was about to explode, and she needed to find a way to disarm him. "Richard, listen," she began, her voice calmer. "You can use your power for good. The community needs you, not as an oppressor, but as a leader." Maya's words hung in the air, and for a moment, Richard's gaze wavered. He seemed confused, as if doubt began to seep into his mind. But soon the anger returned and he prepared to strike again. Maya realized the battle was not just physical, but an emotional struggle. She needed to find a way to connect with him, to make him see the truth. "Richard," she continued, "we all make mistakes, but that doesn't mean we have to continue down this path. We can change. We can do this together." Her sincerity was palpable, and she hoped that somehow her words could reach Richard's hardened heart. But as she spoke, Maya realized that regardless of the outcome of this struggle, her life would never be the same. She had crossed a line, and now the fight for justice was not just a fight for her father, but a fight for her identity and for a future she wanted to believe could be better. The consequences of her choice would echo in her life, and she was ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant dealing with the fear and uncertainty that accompanied her. Maya felt her heart race as the tension around her grew. Richard's gaze, filled with anger, made her feel small, but the determination that had risen within her was stronger than the fear. She knew she had crossed a line, but there was no turning back. The decision to stand by her father, to defend her truth, would change everything in her life. The crowd, once confused and noisy, now seemed to resonate with Maya's courage. The shouts of support grew louder, and she could feel the warmth of solidarity surrounding her. However, the euphoria was quickly overshadowed by reality. Richard, furious, would not be easily intimidated. The fight was far from over. The young police officer, who had seemed hesitant before, was now in a delicate position. He looked at Maya, and she could see the internal struggle on his face. He wanted to do the right thing, but Richard's pressure was immense. "Maya, you need to step back," he said, almost pleading. "This could end very badly." His words hit her like an arrow, but she refused to yield. Watching the situation unfold, David began to move, trying to get closer to Maya. He knew his daughter was in danger, and that he needed to protect her, but the tension in the air made everything more complicated. "Maya, please step back," he pleaded, his voice trembling with concern. But Maya couldn't. She had taken a step forward and would not retreat. Richard, realizing he was losing control, decided to escalate his aggression. "You're getting involved in something you don't understand, girl. This is no place for children." The hostility in his words made Maya's stomach churn, but she stood firm, looking into Richard's eyes with an intensity that challenged his power. The crowd continued to shout, and the atmosphere was about to explode. The tension was palpable, and Maya realized that her actions would not only affect her, but everyone around her. With that in mind, she took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions that engulfed her. The young police officer, recognizing the gravity of the situation, gestured towards Richard. "We need to end this. We can't let this turn into a violent confrontation," he said, his voice laden with urgency. The pressure was rising, and Maya felt that time was running out. If Richard wasn't contained, the consequences could be devastating. But even with the officer's help, the situation felt untenable. Richard turned to the crowd, trying to incite even more anger. "Do you think this man is a hero? He is a criminal." The clamor increased, and Maya realized there was a new obstacle in her path: Richard's emotional manipulation of the crowd. She knew she needed to act quickly. "Stop," she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "You're being deceived. What Richard says isn't true. He just wants to maintain control." Her words came out like a cry of desperation, but also of hope. She wanted people to see the truth, to unite around what was right. Meanwhile, David felt a wave of pride and concern at the same time. He had always known that his daughter had inner strength, but seeing her confront Richard like that left him torn. He wanted to protect her, but he also knew her support was crucial, and what if something happened? A chill ran down his spine at the thought of losing Maya. The tension was at its peak, and the crowd seemed to be in a boiling state. The young police officer, realizing that the situation was about to become uncontrollable, decided to act. He stepped between Richard and Maya, trying to calm the tempers. "We all need to stay calm. We won't let this turn into something worse," he said, his voice steady. Maya looked at the officer, grateful for his support, but the battle was still not won. Richard was on the verge of exploding, and she needed to find a way to disarm him. "Richard, listen," she began, her voice calmer. "You can use your power for good. The community needs you, not as an oppressor, but as a leader." Maya's words hung in the air, and for a moment, Richard's gaze faltered. He seemed confused, as if doubt was beginning to penetrate his mind. But soon the anger returned, and he prepared to attack again. Maya realized that the battle was not just physical, but an emotional struggle. She needed to find a way to connect with him, to make him see the truth. "Richard," she continued, "we all make mistakes, but that doesn't mean we have to stay on this path. We can change, we can do this together." Her sincerity was palpable, and she hoped that somehow her words could reach Richard's hardened heart. But as she spoke, Maya realized that regardless of the outcome of this fight, her life would never be the same. She had crossed a line, and now the fight for justice was not just a fight for her father, but a fight for her identity, and for a future she wanted to believe could be better. The consequences of her choice would echo in her life, and she was ready to face whatever came next, even if that meant dealing with the fear and uncertainty that accompanied her. With the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, Maya took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the crowd around her. Every shout, every word of support reminded her of the importance of her struggle. The internal transformation she was experiencing was profound. She was not just fighting for her father, but for herself as well. She felt stronger, more confident than ever. The battle was far from easy, but in that moment, Maya understood that true strength did not come from the absence of fear, but from the courage to face it. Life was made of choices, and each choice led her down a new path. Now more than ever, she was willing to fight for her truth, for her family, and for the justice she so desperately desired. The journey wouldn't end there, but she was determined to move forward, to grow and to overcome, no matter what the future held. Maya took a deep breath, feeling the intensity of the moment build around her. She knew she was about to face the greatest challenge of her life. Richard's gaze, now mixed with confusion and anger, reflected the internal battle he was fighting. The crowd, which had once seemed like a turbulent sea of emotions, was now anxiously awaiting the outcome of this scene. The young police officer, still positioned between Maya and Richard, sensed that the situation could spiral out of control at any moment. He tried to maintain calm, but the tension in the air was palpable. Feeling the urgency of the moment, Maya decided she needed to go beyond words. It was time to act. "Richard, you don't have to do this," she said, her voice firm and clear. "I know you have a good heart. You can choose to be different." The crowd fell silent, absorbing her words. Maya felt it was the right moment to attempt a genuine connection. "Look around you," she continued, gesturing to the people supporting her. "These people believe in you. They need a leader to guide them toward justice, not fear. What you're doing is not just wrong, it's harmful to all of us." She saw a flicker of doubt in Richard's eyes, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger. "Do you think you can teach me morality, girl?" Richard shouted, his voice echoing in the square. "You don't know anything about what it means to be strong. You're just a child." But Maya didn't back down. She knew this was her chance to show the true strength she had discovered within herself. "I may not know everything, but I know that being strong doesn't mean being aggressive," she replied, her voice now softer, but filled with determination. "Being strong means having the courage to change, to stand up for what is right. And you, Richard, have that courage inside you. It's time to let it shine." The crowd began to murmur, and Maya realized her words were starting to resonate. She saw some people nodding, as if evaluating the truth contained in her message. Richard, on the other hand, was visibly agitated. He clenched his fists, anger radiating from him like a wave. "I won't let you manipulate me, girl," he shouted. But at the same time, the hesitation in his voice was undeniable. Maya felt she had to seize that moment. "This isn't manipulation, Richard. It's an invitation. An invitation for you to be the leader this community needs. Change starts with you. You can be the voice of reason, not of hate." The sincerity in Maya's words flooded the space between them, and for a brief moment, the crowd seemed to be with her. David, watching from a distance, felt his heart race. He knew Maya's courage could change the course of the situation. He also realized that regardless of what would happen, His daughter had become a strong and determined woman. He felt proud, but fear still consumed him. Richard hesitated. He looked at the crowd, then at Maya. Her words echoed in his mind like a mantra. He began to wonder if he was truly strong by perpetuating fear. Was what he was doing the true strength? The anger that had dominated him began to dissipate, giving way to a confusion he didn't know how to handle. "Richard, you can choose a new path," Maya said, her voice softer. "No one is perfect. We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them and moving forward." She stepped a little closer, her gaze fixed on his. "You don't have to be the person you're becoming. You can be better." And then, in a moment of clarity, something shifted. Richard looked at Maya, and in her eyes he saw a reflection of everything he could be. The anger that once consumed him began to melt away. He took a deep breath, as if releasing years of accumulated hatred. The weight of his choices began to feel unbearable. The crowd, sensing the change, started to applaud, encouraging Richard to take the next step. With tears in his eyes, he finally murmured, I don't know if I can." But Maya's words had touched him. "You can," she said with an encouraging smile. "We will be here with you. Together, we can build something better." Gradually, the tension that had once dominated the square transformed into a space of hope. In an unexpected gesture, Richard lowered his head and stepped forward. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry for everything." The words echoed through the crowd, and for the first time he felt light. Maya felt that in that moment, not only was Richard transforming, but she was too. The fight for justice had not ended, but there was a new hope in the air. Maya knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that with courage and support anything was possible. Above all, she had found her true strength, the strength to rise and fight for what is right, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. Maya watched as Richard stepped away from the brink of chaos, her heart racing with the adrenaline of the moment. He was releasing a weight he had carried for so long. The crowd, once tense and divided, now united in a wave of support. People began to approach, offering words of encouragement to Richard, who, with tears streaming down his face, felt the transformation within himself. She remembered how many times she had felt powerless in the face of fear and anger. But now, seeing a man who was once so lost, she realized that change was possible. Richard wasn't just an authority figure, but a human being grappling with his own internal battles. "Thank you, Maya," he whispered, still not looking directly at her. "I don't know what happened, but I feel different now." His words were a mix of relief and confusion, and Maya knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy for him, but she was glad he had taken the first step. "You don't need to have all the answers right now," Maya replied, her voice gentle. "The important thing is that you've decided to change. That's already a great start." She turned to the crowd, which was now in a mood of solidarity. "Let's all support Richard and work together to make this community a better place for all of us." The applause from the crowd grew louder, and Maya felt a warmth in her chest. The support she received was a confirmation that her words had touched people's hearts. The fear that had previously hung in the air was being replaced by a new feeling of hope and unity. David, who was still watching from a distance, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He approached Maya, his heart full of pride. "You were amazing, daughter. Your courage made a difference," he said, wrapping her in a tight hug. Maya returned the embrace, feeling the strength of her father's support. "I just did what anyone would do," she replied. But she knew deep down that courage was not something learned overnight. It was a choice. As the crowd began to disperse, Richard approached Maya and David. "Can I talk to you?" He looked vulnerable, and the sincerity in his gaze touched Maya. "I don't want to be this person. I want to change, but I don't know where to start." Maya smiled, knowing this was an opportunity. "You've already taken the first step, Richard. Acknowledging that you need help is crucial. Let's find a way together." David nodded, and they began discussing ways to rehabilitate the community, to build a space where everyone could feel safe and heard. In the days that followed, Maya noticed a transformation not only in Richard, but in the entire community. People began to gather to discuss changes, and Richard, now more willing to listen, became a central figure in this new movement. He shared his experiences, his struggles, and above all, his determination to do things differently. Maya felt fulfilled. What had started as a moment of despair had transformed into a movement of hope. She had learned that true strength was not just in confronting challenges, but in offering support and understanding to those who needed it most. Every time Richard spoke to the community, she saw the light in his eyes, and that motivated her to keep going. One night, as she reflected on everything that had happened, Maya remembered her own journey. I couldn't have done this alone, she thought. We all have a role to play. This realization brought a new sense of purpose to her life. The fight for justice, which had once felt lonely, was now a shared mission, full of hope and possibility. As she watched Richard speak to a group of young people, Maya smiled. She knew that change was a process, and that every step taken was a victory. The future was still uncertain, but with the support of the community and the strength she had discovered within herself, she was ready to face whatever came. And, more importantly, she knew that true strength lay in fighting together for a better world. Richard had transformed. The man who had once been authoritarian and distant had now become a figure of hope and change. In the weeks that followed the event, he dedicated his time to listening and learning from community members. Each conversation, each shared story contributed to his evolution. He began to understand that he was not just a leader, he was a human being surrounded by other lives and stories, all intertwined in a common quest for a better future. Maya watched this metamorphosis with a mix of pride and relief. She realized that true transformation did not come solely from words, but from action. Richard was not only talking about change, but implementing it. Community projects began to emerge, initiatives for inclusion, and open dialogues between the young and the old. The community, once marked by division, was now uniting around a common vision. However, Richard's journey was not without challenges. Some still viewed him with suspicion, recalling the past. But instead of letting frustration take over, he chose to be an example. With Maya's support, he began working on a series of meetings where community members could express their fears and insects. This not only helped heal wounds, but also established a solid foundation of trust. One night, as the moon illuminated the square, Richard gave a speech that touched everyone's heart. He spoke about his failures, how the desire for control had distanced him from the people who mattered most. He not only apologized, but collectively asked for forgiveness, showing that vulnerability was, in fact, a sign of strength. The crowd listened in silence, and when he finished, a resounding applause echoed through the night. The audience was not just applauding Richard's change, but celebrating the very change they saw within themselves. Maya felt that at that moment, Richard's story intertwined with hers. She too had faced her fears and insecurities, and now understood that true victory was not about defeating someone or something, but about allowing oneself to grow and forgive. The community was rising again, and she was part of this rebirth. What had started as an act of revenge against what Richard had represented had transformed into a force of unity. The revenge that had once been a fleeting thought in many minds now manifested as a genuine desire to understand and support one another. Richard proved that true change could arise even from the most difficult situations, and that forgiveness was a powerful tool. Maya realized there was a deeper lesson there. True transformation was not just about what one achieved, but about how one impacted the lives of others. What once seemed like a simple desire for revenge became a collective quest for redemption and understanding. She looked at Richard, now surrounded by friends and supporters, and smiled. Their journey had been filled with ups and downs, but in the end, they were together, ready to face the future. Hope was alive and vibrant, and everyone there knew that small actions could lead to great changes. Maya invited everyone to reflect on their own journeys. How many times have we allowed resentment to guide us, instead of love and understanding? She paused, looking at the faces surrounding her. Let's continue this mission together. Share your stories, your victories, and your struggles. Each of us has the power to transform each other's lives, and together we can create a better future. The community responded with enthusiasm, and seeing the unity and determination in each person's eyes, Maya knew that change was just beginning. The true strength was there, in every heart willing to love and forgive, because in the end, life is about connection, and that connection, she realized, was what made everything so valuable. If you also have a story of overcoming or transformation, share it in the comments. Let's inspire each other to continue this journey. Like and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of unity and love. The time to act is now.